Hello ladies and gents, I'm Pete aka on a retro tip and welcome back to another cancelled games video, and you're getting 2 for 1 today because it's a Game Gear and Master System double whammy. The reason for this is that I couldn't find that many interesting cancelled games for these two consoles, well, at least not with anything substantial to show you. So today we're looking at 8 cancelled games for Sega's handheld and a mere 3 for the Sega Master System. I know that adds up to 11 and not 10, but one of them was planned for both systems. The Game Gear seems to get treated rather unfairly, being labelled as merely a portable version of the Master System, but in reality it didn't just have Master System ports, it had some great exclusives too. The Master System is a well-loved console over here in the UK and Europe, having fared much better than the Nintendo Entertainment System. Whatever your history or opinion on these two consoles, let's take a look at 10 of the games that never made it to release. As most of you will know, Road Rash 2 was a Mega Drive exclusive and is considered by most to be the best of the trilogy on that console. A Game Gear version was also in the works for release in late '94. The Game Gear version was reviewed in gaming magazines and was featured in adverts for upcoming games for the handheld. Despite this, all that seems to exist publicly is a very poor quality preview video. To be fair though, despite its poor quality, the gameplay and graphics seem pretty solid for a Game Gear game. Rumour has it that Road Rash 2 on the Game Gear was reimagined, eventually becoming Kawasaki Superbike Challenge. Barbie Supermodel was an awful action-stroke puzzle game released in North America for the Genesis, SNES and DOS in 1993. You play as the popular children's toy character Barbie, guiding her around town in order to obtain outfits for her to wear, as she is, as the title would suggest, a model. The game has 2 distinct aspects, one in which you're guiding her around town, be it in a car or on roller skates or on foot, which is extremely drab and merely a case of avoiding obstacles which come at you at a pace that can never be described as urgent, and puzzle sections where you match her outfit to the cover of a magazine which you have to recreate from memory. A Game Gear port of Barbie was announced at '94 CES, but was cancelled, thank God, and a prototype has since been dumped online. Pac-in-Time is a scrolling platform game released in '94 for DOS, Mac, SNES and Game Boy, but was also planned for Sega's Mega Drive and Game Gear. In stark contrast to the usual top-down munchathon Pac-Man format, Pac-in-Time sees Pac-Man traversing side-scrolling levels in 5 varying worlds, on foot and in water, collecting items, avoiding the enemy flora and fauna, and collecting pellets. This element of course does take inspiration from the original game, and a certain number of pellets must be collected before a level can be completed. In another nod to Pac-Man's arcade pedigree, he'll encounter ghosts throughout the game which will of course chase him down, and as expected, power pellets also make an appearance. One additional gameplay element to mention is that he can obtain 4 different power-ups which are gained by jumping through coloured rings. Pac-in-Time was developed by Callisto and is in fact a reskin of their earlier game Fury of the Furries. Unlike its Mega Drive counterpart, a ROM of the Game Gear version has been released online. Spyro is an Infogrames platformer released in '95-96 for the Mega Drive, SNES, Game Boy and PC. Based on the Franco-Belgian comic book Spyro e Fantasio, sorry for the terrible pronunciation there, in the game you control the title character on a mission to rescue his kidnapped friend and foil his arch-enemy's plan to take over the world. A Game Gear version was developed but cancelled, perhaps due to the handheld's dwindling popularity by the mid-90s. A shame, as the graphics are really striking for a Game Gear game. Spyro employs the typical platformer controls, but there's also a sliding dive move which can be used to access certain areas, and in later levels a gun can be obtained. There are also underwater levels where air is limited but can be replenished by collecting oxygen bottles. The player can take several hits before dying, indicated on a health bar at the top of the screen. If you die, you go back to the level's start, unless you're out of lives, in which case it's game over. Similar to collecting rings for extra lives in Sonic, extra lives are rewarded by collecting 50 hats, which are strewn throughout the levels. Yogi Bear's Gold Rush came out on the Game Boy in 1994, but a Game Gear version was also planned. The game's bizarre plot sees Yogi strive to save Jellystone Park when an evil ghost nicks the cash set aside for the park's upkeep. It's a traditional no-frills platformer featuring 6 stages in various locations and hidden areas. These areas must be found in order to crack safes, in which Yogi can collect coins in order to obtain a gold bar. To complete the game fully, he'll need 12 gold bars, giving the park enough money to continue running. There are no weapons or power-ups at Yogi's disposal, instead he jumps on enemies to kill them a la Mario. He can also change character to his little mate Boo Boo, although I'm unsure what the difference between the two is besides Boo Boo having a slightly higher jump. Picnic baskets can be collected and getting 100 will award an extra life. Crazy Faces was developed by the Kremlin for the Game Gear to be published by Domark around 1993. It's a very simple game involving pushing around tiles in order to make a picture, exactly like the little puzzle games we used to have as kids, and perhaps they still do, I don't know. The pictures were of various video game licenses owned by Domark and Sega at the time. Unlike the traditional sliding puzzles, Crazy Faces requires the player to add the tiles to the board a row at a time, rather than all the tiles being on the board at the start. Although very simple in design, I'm sure anyone who used to have one of these puzzles knows how fiendishly hard they can be to solve. Crazy Faces was actually based on the Commodore 64 game Split Personalities, also from Domark. For whatever reason, the game was cancelled, but smspower released a ROM of the prototype in 2012. The last Game Gear game on this list is Wildsnake, which was actually released for the Super Nintendo and Game Boy in '94. Mega Drive and Game Gear ports were advertised alongside the 2 Nintendo releases, and promotional material featured legendary Tetris creator Alexei Pajitnov, although he wasn't involved in the game's development, so I'm not sure what that was all about. The SNES and Game Boy boxes even say Alexei Pajitnov, creator of Tetris, introduces Wildsnake. Despite his lack of involvement, the game does have some similarities to Tetris and other similar puzzle games like Columns. Snakes of various colours fall down the screen, and the player places them in order to connect snakes of the same colour, which makes them disappear. The snakes can also be moved briefly once they've reached the bottom. Wildsnake is an interesting and perhaps more strategic take on the genre. Prototypes of both the Mega Drive and Game Gear versions have been found, and the ROM of the Game Gear version is available online, again from smspower. Sonic's Edusoft was developed in 1991 by Teatex and is seemingly an unlicensed educational game featuring, as is obvious from the name, Sonic. It's basically a series of mini-games which are maths and English puzzles. There's a hub world where a 16-bit era looking Sonic roams around a 3D world from where each minigame is accessed. Most of the game spent solving puzzles involving either arithmetic or finding a hidden word from a given set of letters. There are also 3 other minigames, one in which Sonic pops passing balloons, one like classic Sonic where he runs sideways and must jump to avoid obstacles, and one where the player controls the position of a trampoline in order to keep Sonic in the air. A ROM of Sonic's Edusoft was released in 2008. Pat Riley Basketball, developed and published by Sega, was released on the Genesis in 1990 and on the Mega Drive in Europe and Japan as Super Real Basketball. A Master System port was developed but for some reason never released. The Genesis and planned Master System versions were named after Pat Riley, who was at the time the coach for the Lakers. The game features 8 fictional teams to choose from, and the Master System port appears to be largely the same as the Mega Drive counterpart, albeit a scaled down version. Much like this video, this entry's a 2 for 1, as Dino Basher, starring Big Nose the Caveman, was planned for both the Master System and the Game Gear. It was released as Big Nose the Caveman on Amiga, Atari ST and the NES in 1991. Optimus Software developed the Sega versions to be published by Codemasters in '93, and they were completely finished. Not only has the prototype emerged, or at least the Master System version has, but prototype box and cartridge art have also surfaced, leading to various repros being produced. Dino Bashers is a run-of-the-mill platformer wherein you control Big Nose the Caveman, who, surprise surprise, has a massive nose. He makes his way through some pretty bland levels, bashing dinosaurs with his club or hurling projectiles at them. Although visually it looks decent enough, the gameplay is uninspired. The game received poor reviews during testing, so despite being completely finished, the game was cancelled. So those were 10 of the unreleased games for Sega's Game Gear and Master System. Let me know if any of them tickle your fancy, and as always, thanks for watching. If you want to see more on the Game Gear, check out my video on some great exclusives for the handheld, or if you're interested in seeing some cancelled games for other consoles, here's the playlist.